Well, I think why don't we, I guess we can go ahead and get started, but why don't we open by introducing everyone and just sort of checking in with how everyone is doing. And Alicia, you're first on my screen, so why don't you go first?
Just muted myself. My name's Alicia. I'm in the process of getting more and more back to work right now. So realizing I'm actually going into work for a full day tomorrow, which is about the second time in several months. So that's going to be weird. What else what am I supposed to say? That
Just how you're doing. Okay, let's see, Colin, I have you next.
Hey, I'm Colin Buckner, and I am glad to be here. I have a 5-year-old and a 4-year-old, and they are not asleep, so I'm hoping I can stay as long as I can.
Oh, good.
If I have to jet out or turn my camera off, it's been a long day. So, yes, but I'm doing great. Enjoying summer vacation. So I'm a teacher as well, so I'm glad to be on a little bit of a break.
Oh, that's good. Okay, great. Okay, how about Jeremy? How about you and Jenna next?
Hi, Jeremy Sykes and Jenna, my better half. Our kids are also not asleep, Colin, so we have them in their rooms reading, and that sometimes means, you know, I'll just read as long as I can. Sometimes it means I'll go to bed at 8 when I'm supposed to. So I don't know, we'll see. Yeah, nice to see you.
Okay, great. How about you, Michael?
Have I been muted?
I'm doing well, yeah. So I'm Michael Cannell. I am about to be a sophomore in college at St. John's College in Annapolis. I'm interning for Idlewild this summer, so I'm kind of, you know, trying to keep busy, trying to really contemplate things and think things through, but they're still kind of, it's one of those things where one day you're doing nothing, and then the next day you've got a couple of things you have to do, and then the next day you're kind of busy, and the next day you're doing nothing. So it's a little bit funny that way. So just trying to keep busy and do my best.
Well, that's great. Well, I'm Marjorie Reynolds. I'm the director of children's ministry, and so this was my topic tonight. Talking to children about racism, and in all of the reading I have done, I think I'm going to be able to talk to your children about racism if we are together, but I don't think I have done a very good job talking to my children about racism as I read. But did y'all get a chance to read either of the articles? And that's fine if you didn't. But one of them started out with 4 questions to ask yourself before you have conversations with your children. So I thought we would kind of loosely use those to start the conversation. And the first one was, how are you processing your feelings about racism, about raising race-conscious children, and about how those conversations are going in your home? Hey, Ann. Hi.
Hey,
I'm glad you could join us.
good to be here.
We just were starting, and we're loosely using the questions off of one of the articles. And so the first question is, how are you processing your feelings about racism yourself? Or we
Well,
can,
and there's a lot to process, right? We're in the world of the pandemic, and we're in the world of protests and how those things interact. And we're in a world where elections are decided by you know, people's reactions to racism and xenophobia and other things. And so there's a lot going through my head, and it's hard to process it all. That's my confession, I guess. It's difficult to process it all. It just feels like it's too much all at once.
mm-hmm.
You know, I think my processing has started with, I may be getting what I've watched on the 10-week study mixed up with what I read for tonight, but I guess taking in so much, but I was raised by parents who really had an active role in the civil rights in Memphis, but really raised me that not to see color. But my mother was an educator and volunteered in the school system when I was very young. And I was the white kid that people wanted to touch. Like, I want to touch your hair because it's different. And so a lot of my processing of racism has been doing some intentional writing around, like, my earliest memories of being in Memphis and, you know, what were the narratives that my parents were teaching. So that's kind of where my processing is, as it relates to how I'm processing. That's kind of where it is. I also live in a house with an 18-year-old daughter who has some really strong opinions. And so some of our processing is happening at the dinner table, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And just having conversations, which sometimes end up with one of us leaving.
Oh,
I mean, it's okay. It's just it gets too escalated, so we need time away.
yeah. Hey, Becky.
Hey, sorry I'm late. Bedtime.
Yes, I'm glad you're here. We just were getting started and we're talking about how we're processing our own feelings with regard to racism and all the things, really. It's kind of where we were starting.
Personally, I've been feeling a lot of frustration, I think, with not only the administration of the United States, but also the way that people are handling things just in general as a nation. I think some of that probably comes from, I grew up in West Africa, so a lot of that probably comes from growing up with the effects of colonialism being a thing that's constantly surrounding you. And there's a lot of kind of stereotypes about white people in West Africa that are really quite justified because of colonialism and because of the culture that evolved from it. And it can be really difficult to try to find a way to kind of be supportive in the way that you need to be supportive and share, like, what you know about how to deal with it properly, and kind of see, oh, well, some people are doing this, some people are doing that, maybe that's okay, and maybe there are certain areas that people need to gain a better understanding of, you know, each side. I don't know how clear that is. But,
Yeah, I think it's interesting, Michael, that you bring up the colonized. There's a text, and I don't know who wrote it, but it's called The Colonizer and the Colonized. And that is probably not about talking to your children about racism, but for an orientation, it is probably one of those seminal texts for me.
And do you know who wrote it, or is that the title?
It is the title.
Okay.
I can find it. Hold on a second. Disappear from y'all.
Interesting.
I find that I don't have as much with American racism, but I do have this experience with kind of colonialism. So I take from that a lot. And a lot of that, I think, comes from being raised among that and kind of having this point of view of, oh, we are different people. You're African and I'm American, or, you know, I'm American and I grew up here. So I need to listen to your point of view first because I'm in your culture, I'm partaking in your country. So a lot of that comes from a sort of respect of the differences between me and other people. So I definitely see the similarities, but I have like this kind of ingrained respect for the culture around me because my parents kind of taught me, oh, you're in someone else's culture, you're living among other people, you need to listen and you need to learn first. That's kind of just my own experience though, which I don't know how that looks, you know, displaced from Africa and taken to America.
Well, I like the way they taught you there. I mean, you need to listen and learn first. That's a powerful approach, actually, for this too, I think. Well, I mean, maybe the actual crux of the question to get us going is, are you having conversations with your children? How are they going? What do you say? What have you been saying? Or what have you changed that you perceive?
Well, so to kind of answer the initial question, what I have learned is that every person has their own unique set of experiences that have led to their own unique understanding of how racism is or is not a part of their world. And that no two people's experience is the same. And so having a conversation on common ground with other people is very difficult. Because, I mean, even growing up in Memphis, like I went to school in small town South Carolina, which gave me a different set of a different perspective. And I went to public school versus private school, or I went to Idlewild versus like a more diverse church. And so like there are lots of different things that lead to everyone's sort of understanding. So sort of having in a lot of conversations, you can sort of assume a common ground on certain things. And I think with conversations about racism, that assumption is null and void. Like you can't assume because everyone has this dynamic set of experiences that led to why they think the way they think. So I think that's really important. But at the risk of talking too much, to bleed into your second question of are we talking about it? So with Adam, no. Like with Adam, who is that how you say your name?
Michael.
Michael. Okay, so Michael, you don't know this, but everyone else does. Adam is like not even 2 yet. So we're still working on cup, ball. Like, no, we're not having conversations about that. But with Simon, we are. We have been talking a lot about, here, I have it right here. Give me just a second. We've been reading books like this one. It's like The Skin You Live In. And we've been talking about how everybody's skin is a different color and like trying to kind of counteract this sort of colorblind thing that is kind of being revealed now is like not the best way to talk about race. As we were taught in the 90s. And so we're trying to right now just talk about awareness with Simon. That's sort of where we are.
Mm-hmm. Well, Jenna, your kids are older. How is it a different conversation with them? I mean, I would think it is.
Yeah. We started out when they were younger, reading books that, talked about everyone is different and has different backgrounds and their families are different. There's all kinds of different possibilities and celebrating that diversity. And I remember you found a book that focused on immigration and talking about the diversity that way because, he's an immigration attorney. So of course that subject came up. And I don't know if this was probably the wrong way to go about it in the way I did, is instead of talking about white and black and the names of the races, we talked more, we would describe people like, this friend has dark skin and you have light skin. And I remember when Eden was in, I think, kindergarten, and they attended a very diverse school. And so her black friends were saying, you're white. And she got so upset and she was like, no, I'm pink. Because she was trying to describe like the actual color of her skin.
But, that experience, you mentioned the diverse kindergarten. I mean, that experience too was formative for them. And as they continued on through school, their best friends are Black and brown. Eden's best friend is Muslim and Palestinian ethnically. And Reed's best friends are a set of black twins. So that has been formative for them as they have kind of grown a little bit older and are now living into this moment too. So I don't know what we would be doing with them if they didn't have that experience. That makes things easier to talk about. You don't just talk about something in the abstract when it's, your best friend whose name is on your door because she sent you a note, then it's real.
And we have definitely discussed the history, and of course they're learning it in school as well, behind discrimination based on skin color and how it's still a problem today. There's many people today who, see skin color and immediately think lesser of that person, or, depending on their race. And so we've made sure that they're very aware of that. And they, of course, think it's crazy that someone would treat someone differently because of their skin color.
Our kids are, in case I didn't say this, they're rising third graders. That's their age.
So as rising third graders, do you let them know about things like George Floyd?
We have not yet. It's
an ongoing conversation with us and
yeah,
between us, and we'll maybe get there, but
we definitely plan to. We just haven't figured out how do we do
Well,
it.
I have no judgment. I'm curious. I was curious.
As a third grade teacher, sorry, there's a huge echo. As a third grade teacher, I guarantee you some of their classmates have been told about it. And I would think that you would rather them hear it from you than from their classmates.
Well, the good news, Becky, is that school's been out. So
yeah, no, exactly.
We haven't been compelled to that point of decision, and I'm sure we will before school starts.
And
again.
we completely realize that it is a huge privilege that our children don't have to, they've been sheltered from this, and their friends don't have that privilege. They've been aware of this since they were very young.
In my reading for tonight, one of the things that I listened to a podcast, and it was two moms talking, one's black and one's white, and what I found fascinating and just had never occurred to me was the black mother talking about teaching her child how to stay safe. Her little boy, how to stay safe. And safe from police, safe in different parts of town, not just safe, don't get in the van with the puppy. And I hadn't thought about that aspect of parenting as that kind of, as a black mom. It just, it made my heart hurt.
Well, it's interesting to me, again, being a teacher, and Idlewild is right next door to a police station. For those of you who don't know the geography very well, literally right next door. When we play outside, our playground backs up to a police department, and so we see police officers all the time. And hearing the conversations that the white kids are like, "Oh, police officers, they're here to help us," and I'd say at least half of the black children are fearful. They either have been taught or they have had experiences in which they feel that they need to be threatened by a police presence. And it's a sharp juxtaposition. And the white kids are like, why would you be scared of the police? They're there to protect you. We've learned about that since we were babies. What are you talking about? And they just don't get it. And I mean, and like you were saying, it's hard for us to imagine that being something that you would have to teach your children. But it's a reality.
I've been feeling a lot of conflict myself on that point, largely because my grandfather is a police officer. He's been a police officer for really as long as I can remember. And I know that the things that have been happening. He lives in St. Louis, so there's no little past of police aggression where he's, and I know that the things that have been happening are just tearing him apart. He's so sad about it. And it's really difficult for me sometimes to kind of reconcile the two things, because I know, especially reading up on Breonna Taylor, she was attacked in her own home, doing absolutely nothing wrong. She had ambitions that were similar to my own sister's. She wanted to be a nurse. And it's so sad to hear that she was killed with so much force, so much aggression, without anyone even double checking to make sure that they were doing the right thing in the right place. And on the other hand, I see my grandfather, who's a very good moral man and a very good police officer who really cares about people and is very careful about what he does. And it's very upsetting to me, and I'm having trouble kind of, looking at both sides of the story and trying to see what's right in this situation.
And at the risk of being misunderstood, I want to clarify, like, the police officers next door have done nothing but like throw the ball over when we throw it back during recess, and like protect the kids at the crosswalk, and they hated them when they see them. Like, they've been nothing but kind and supportive and anything like that. It's not that the kids have any reason to fear them. It's just stories they've heard, and it could just be like one bad apple, but it's enough to affect their reality.
Yeah, I understand. That's got to be something that's very difficult to deal with, especially for really small children. It's kind of these two opposed ideas of, oh, this police officer is good, but some of them are bad and some of them are violent, but we're supposed to respect them, but they're doing these bad things, but not all of them are bad. That's got to be a lot to process.
Well, and children like order and rule. Well, they don't like rules necessarily, but they like to be able to make sense of their world. So I think children have a very clear idea of this is right, this is wrong, this is fair, this is not. And sometimes, this is when it gets messy and hard to talk to them, because it's not so black and white. And, for their little brains to understand, wrap their head around it, I think is challenging. I did have this one, I read a different article this afternoon, and I did want to read y'all this part because I thought this was, speaking of fair, is when you're talking to your children about racism, to harness their keen sense of justice to help explain that the patterns that they see are absolutely unfair, as well as to engage your children in seeking out to correct these wrongs. Children are already noticing patterns in the world around them, and it's your opportunity to help them think critically about what they're seeing rather than accepting those things as rules. So to be intentional about things like point out everyday things that make you upset because they are unfair. For example, there are not enough Black and brown children in the books at the library. So trying to help them sort of sort out something in their world, and that they can impact that, I guess.
Can I ask a question of the educators and teachers? I guess that's Marjorie and Becky and Colin, all three of y'all. How easy is it for kids at, let's say, 7, 8, to make those kinds of connections? Are their little brains able to connect these issues of just simple fairness and representation to broader issues of justice at that age, or is there an age where it's they're able to make those connections a little better or easier? That's a silly question, but hopefully it got something got through.
It definitely depends on the person. I know adults that would have a hard time making that connection, and I know 5-year-olds that would do it with ease. So it depends on the kid, I think. It depends on their background. It depends on how they think. A lot of things.
I teach To Kill a Mockingbird in 7th grade at Grace St. Luke's, and we definitely talk about racism, prejudice, all of that, and they definitely can handle it, I think, at that age, 12, 13.
Mhm.
But Jeremy, what was that book? Was it No More Elephants or something? You mentioned it, I remember, in
Yeah.
a Sunday school.
Yeah, there was No More Elephants, and then there
Okay.
was
I was
in
trying
a
to.
short minute, Colin. I'll figure it out. I've got it written down somewhere. Yeah,
You
we've
had a
got the book
great
somewhere too.
list like 2 years ago or something for a
Yeah.
Sunday school about references, especially for little ones, because it's hard to talk about racism
Mhm.
with the younger ones. That's
Yeah.
what I'm finding. I'm not doing it good enough. Like we have the books, we have, I acknowledge, oh, here's Layla. She has beautiful brown skin, and we love everyone, but I feel like I'm not doing enough. So I feel like we're probably all in that same boat. What else can we do other than have those conversations?
Well, I think and providing that diversity in the home with the books, and it's all building on one thing onto another in their lives. And so just by having any conversation with them, actually, I think we're doing a better service to the children all along the way than the previous thought, which was, everybody is the same. Don't talk about color. It just like it doesn't exist. That's the way I was brought up. So
I think I related to Becky, what you were saying earlier. Like, I feel like our parents are like, oh, everybody's beautiful. We don't need to talk about color. Like, it's just kind of shoved under the rug a little bit. Until I did a program called Bridge Builders here in Memphis, which is awesome.
yes.
Yes. And that was the first time that really my eyes opened to, the racism that did exist in a lot of areas. So, but I think acknowledging it and talking about it is helpful for everyone.
Well, and then I think one of the articles said, do you celebrate diversity? And that was a new concept to me too, to talk about to celebrate these things that make us all different, as opposed to all the ways that we treat each other wrongly. Like, let's come to appreciate this other culture, other race, whatever whatever it is, but to have a celebration of it, not just to talk about all the wrong doing too. So I think that lends respect also.
One thing that I have sort of entered my sphere of thought that wasn't necessarily there a few months ago is the concept of assimilation as a form of racism. And that just recognizing like, oh, there are 3 Black kids in this group of 60 kids, therefore like this is not a racist institution, or this is not a racist whatever, because there's this representation. And it's like, but those kids have the exact same culture as everyone else that they're in, and like it a lot of times race is not just a skin color, but it's a culture and it's an identity, and there's a dynamic there that involves more than just the color of your skin. And that's not something that necessarily needs to be hidden or assimilated. Like, because a child talks differently or dresses differently or wears clothes differently, like appreciating that as just as valid as the way you talk or the way you dress or the way you wear your hair or whatever, like that's another sort of, that's addressing racism in a different way. That just because somebody's skin that looks like yours, it could still be, you're still wanting them to assimilate to your culture, like, because that makes you feel more comfortable. And I mean, I do it too. I'm not like accusing anyone. That's just sort of part of our society or our culture. And so I see that celebrating as a form of that, as not just saying like, I think it's really beautiful that your skin's a different color. Now, please talk like I do, because that's not really celebrating it.
Along the lines of celebrating diversity, that kind of rings a bell for me personally. Sorry, I know I'm talking a lot of from personal experience. I don't have children. I don't have a lot of experience with young children, especially like right now. But I remember when I was growing up, our church here in Memphis, when we were living here when I was little, was a very diverse church with a lot of different people from a lot of different backgrounds. And their motto actually was unity through diversity. And that's kind of, I'm not trying to be critical at all, but that's something I kind of miss after moving to Idlewild. I really love Idlewild, and I really love the culture there, and the kind of the ability to be a woman there, the ability to lead as a woman is a wonderful opportunity that I just didn't get at this church that I was at before. But that kind of beautiful diversity that they had there is definitely something I feel lacking a little bit more, especially when I went off to school. I moved to Annapolis, Maryland, which, believe it or not, is on the low end of diverse. So, you know, I do miss it sometimes. And I think that was really important to me as a child, to have that diversity surrounding me and the different people of all different kinds, and looking at everyone as kind of a family in Christ. So for what it's worth, I guess.
I think one of the things that we have been struggling with my, you know, my children are older, so we're definitely having conversations more like Anne and Abigail must be having. I mean, we talk about the news and we talk about what they've read, what I've read. That we sit here in Germantown, y'all, and they go to public school, the boys do, and it is diverse to a degree. It is diverse. You have all colors of skin there, but it's not very socially, economically diverse. And so I'm struggling for my children to understand that there can be racism outside of, they see it more as poverty. Racism is poverty, or racism is seen in poverty, which I guess it is too, but I'm like, no, there's racism in your school, you know, but they tie it to poverty a lot. And that's been hard to talk to about, because when we were talking earlier about what are your thoughts, it's like my brain gets so tired because it's all tangled up together and I don't know how to pull it apart to make sense for myself, my children, to move on even. It's weird. What books have y'all liked for your kids? Colin, who just held one up? That was you, Becky. Have y'all had any ones that you like?
But No Elephants, it's a really great story. I read that one, I remember when I was growing up. And Jeremy taught a Sunday school a couple years ago, I remember, and had a great list of references about bringing diversity into your home through books. And we definitely did a whole Sunday school unit maybe about probably a year or two ago. I remember Stephanie Rada and a couple other people brought some books in from the libraries, and it was I enjoyed that Sunday school. It was a 2 or 3 week session that we did, just reading through different books and incorporating and how to talk to your kids about them.
Stephanie has a list somewhere of all of those books that she might have emailed it. Yeah,
it's got to be Stephanie Rada. Yeah.
Yeah. I did one a couple years ago, but Stephanie is a way better resource for any of this than I am.
Well, I was thinking, we've been back at the building at Idlewild this week, and I walked into the nursery with fresh eyes too, looking, what are the toys in there? What are the books in there? Are we showing diversity in different kinds of families, and even in the nursery? That was a big old no. I've got some work to do in there when I get back, when we're having children back, I think. So I think, these articles, I guess it's not enough just to talk about racism. It's more about how to raise anti-racist children and how to teach that mindset, I guess. Do y'all do any training as teachers on that, I wonder? Diversity training, is that what they would call it even?
So yes, we we've had a culturally responsive classroom training is what that would be. And so we do, because we have a high ESL population too. So it's not just like a black, white thing. It's a all colors of the rainbow thing. But then we just this summer, like a couple of weeks ago, had Zoom with the faculty meetings as sort of like a response to this and how do we do it. But I'm interested to see, I saw Colin nodding too. So I'm kind of interested in what you have to say as well.
Yeah. We've used Facing History in Ourselves is an amazing organization here in Memphis. I think they're national too. And they bring in resources about diversity. And, you know, I work at a small private Christian school, and that's constantly something that's, you know, bring in more diversity. That's, I mean, we have like 5 different aspects of things that, you know, the school's trying to work on. And I actually just got an email last night from one of my old classmates from St. Mary's. We had 5, I think, Black girls in our graduating class. And she wrote this beautifully written email about how St. Mary's hasn't progressed that far. You know, like a lot of the private schools in this area need to do a lot more work, honestly. And ways she wrote, it was really great because that's something I've been struggling with. What do I do? You know, I can't give money. Do I go down and protest? What do I do? I'm kind of stuck at home with 2 kids. Like how, you know, I can raise these kids to celebrate. I love that phrase, celebrate diversity. Because I think that's really important. But anyways, it was really great. I think just to have conversations with people. Whereas before we maybe didn't talk as much about racism and, you know, how other people felt. So I'm trying to myself learn how to have those there's Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man podcast out there. He's great. I've really enjoyed watching him. And so that's something that I've been working on.
So Colin, I'm going to argue with you just a little bit in saying that where you went, St. Mary's does not have as like bad of St. Mary's has a great reputation actually for handling issues like racism and trying to approach it and talking about it. And you may be feeling like they may not have done enough. And I don't know. Like there may definitely be some things that they still need to work on. But they have St. Mary's has at least been vocal about like Black Lives Matter. Let's celebrate diversity. Let's talk about it. And there are a lot of other places in the city where that has been like actively something that was not wanting to be talked about. So I want to argue with you a little bit that like, I think, I mean, your perspective of, you probably have some of the same feelings I have about like, where I went to college is having some of those same things now. It's like, oh, we weren't doing enough. And I'm feeling like guilt and shame of like, what could I have done better? And it's a hard feeling to carry. And so I think the very fact that you're talking about it and you're thinking about it, and that whoever that is that wrote a letter and feels comfortable talking about it, like that says a lot.
Mm-hmm. It does. Yeah. And I think this whole movement has brought out a lot of conversations, and empowerment, you know, which has been a great thing for people who might not necessarily have been heard before. I teach To Kill a Mockingbird, which is, you know, we talk a lot about racism and prejudice, and it's often kind of hard sometimes because I'll have like 2 Black kids in a class of, you know, 20 kids total. And one thing I've heard from Facing History in Ourselves is never like isolate them. Say, okay, what are your thoughts on this? You know, wait for them to speak up. You never want to make somebody feel uncomfortable for, you know, who they are. But yeah, it's a lot to think about.
You know, are we still talking about celebrating diversity? I'm sorry, the cat was keeping the kids awake, so I missed. We moved on from that. Okay, if we are. Michael, you mentioned something a few minutes ago about Idlewild and our pretty stark lack of diversity in our congregation. And it made me remember, not really think of, but remember some thinking and conversations I've been having lately about just how does Idlewild become more invitational to a more diverse group of people, because we have this beautiful tradition-laced liturgy and worship, which I adore, and I think it's great. And very happy that we have it, but is that invitational to people who are of a different race or a different background or a different culture? And what could we do to make it more invitational? And is that even asking the right question? Is being invitational, inviting people in, the right question? Or should we then be seeking to engage outside of our walls? So these are some thoughts, just some things I've been thinking about within our church in the context of the conversation we're having. And I'm not sure what it looks like going forward in a lot of mainline denominations, including PCUSA and including Idlewild, but I think it's a conversation worth having and something to start a discussion on anyway.
I do think one thing that kind of maybe inhibits a little bit of a diversity at Idlewild is just kind of the fact that it's a Presbyterian church, which just doesn't happen to have as much diversity in it inherently, is what I don't know. I've not researched it or anything, but it's kind of what I gathered. The church that I went to as a child was a Church of Christ, which, you know, historically has had a lot of Black followers, and it's kind of got a history of diversity in and of itself. I think it would be really cool for Idlewild, and really, in a way, important for Idlewild to reach out a little bit more and to kind of strive for that kind of diversity. But I don't put all of the blame on Idlewild or on the Presbyterian Church for how it is.
Jeremy, I think you bring up a really good point about, you know, with the restructuring, especially of COVID. One of the things my good friend Erica, who wrote the letter last night, said is, now is the time to act. You know, now is the time to have all these conversations. Now is the time to think about, okay, how do we restructure? How do we change? And Marjorie, I know you sent me an email, you know, what do we do? How do we bring people slowly back onto church's campus? And I think that's something, you know, switching up the music or something, you know, just something, having a shorter service, or I think that would be something that Idlewild should look into for sure. I know there are so many different diversity committees. You know, it seems like every organization now has a diversity committee to help with this movement, with everything that's going on. And that's something I think Idlewild should definitely look into.
So Presbyterianism historically has had a large focus on education. The founding fathers lots of them were educators, and some of the first schools were founded by the Presbyterian Church, and Presbyterianism has always put a high value in education. And you see a lot of like intellectualism and a lot of the structures. And reality is education was denied to people of color until like the 60s. So the fact that the Presbyterian Church is largely white is understandable, because systemically, like, it was racist, not overtly racist, but systemically it was. And so I have these questions now, is like, if intentionally saying like, okay, so I know we have this like history, but we want Black people now, like we want people of color now, like, come on. I'm wondering if that's not a form of like tokenism, which again is another form of racism, or another form of assimilation. And so like, it makes me kind of question, like, if we just want Black people or people of color because of their skin color, like, isn't that tokenism? Because that's not great either. And so I don't know how to, this is a legit question. I do not have the answers, but it's something that I have been processing.
That's a really good question. And I think that you bring up some very important issues with the way that people have like historically dealt with a lack of diversity, especially in schools. But I do think it would be a really good opportunity to do it right, almost, and say like, oh, historically we've not been good about this. Historically, there have been things where we've done badly. But for one thing, we recognize that that's a bad thing, and we want to fix it. And we don't want to, force anyone into things, but we're committed to giving people more opportunity. because of the lack of opportunity in the past. I don't know what exactly that would look like, but
it's a
I think-
church, not a business. And so like
Yeah.
that's sort of a different perspective, you know?
Yeah, that is.
I wonder if, I'm sorry, go ahead, Michael.
I was just saying I would probably, I'd have to look more at how a church functions. I don't know as much about that.
One thing I heard somewhere, and I'm trying to think if maybe it was a Black pastor somewhere, but it's about, oh yeah, white churches say, oh, they want to help with anti-racism and or poverty or whatever is like affecting a different community, and then like partner, he's like, yeah, that's great, but then like they have their own programs that they want the predominantly Black church to come participate in, and he was like, well, why don't the predominantly white churches come like join us in our programs that we're already doing? And I guess that's something that's kind of stuck with me of how, and it kind of goes with the not doing the listing rather than necessarily taking the lead, but still like participating.
Well,
I guess
Alicia, that sounds like celebrating them, right?
Yes.
Perhaps the
Being
first
value
step,
on what they've been doing rather than trying to put our own culture onto it.
the
But
first
of
step,
course, if we're going and joining what they're doing, then it's not tokenism. We're joining them and their culture.
I'm really sorry, Alicia. I accidentally interrupted you twice there, so I apologize for that. But I guess the first step would probably be to ask people of color what would be best for them, what would work best for them, and what would be most respectful.
You know, a lot of, sorry, go ahead. Marjorie, I'm not going to interrupt you. You need to talk.
I just had one comment, just because I don't know who here would have known this, but at the last session meeting, Beth Simpson read a letter, and Michael, she is a member of the congregation. She's about 80, and she teaches kindergarten and first Sunday school. She's wonderful. But anyway, at the session meeting a couple weeks ago, she read a letter that was from the young adults in 1968 in response to the sanitation strike and the killing of Martin Luther King, and it was signed by the young adults, of which Beth Simpson was one. And so she read the letter at the session meeting, and it was like the letter had been written in the last month. It was really powerful. And so, Jeremy, to your point, what this is starting, I'm starting to feel like Anne Apple. It's all swirling around in my head, but I wonder, Anna spent quite a bit of time in the archives from 1968. I wonder if we unbox that history, because it's not pretty what happened inside the church back then. I mean, in the end, a pastor was asked to move on because of his stronger stance on the civil rights movement. And what if we were to invite, the people of color of Memphis in to hear the story, and everybody can move, you know what I mean? Like, share that yucky history. Maybe that would take some of that for Idlewild itself and make Idlewild being vulnerable seem more approachable. I don't know.
I don't think we can ever think about systemic change, which, Becky, you may not have been getting at, but that's been bouncing around in my head. Is the change that needs to happen systemic rather than, just altering the type of worship we have? But instead of that, maybe the way forward is to just engage, just to go out and to be among the people and to not be afraid. I think a lot of times we're white people are afraid to be the only person in a space that is majority people of color, or majority Black, or majority Hispanic, or just majority other. We're terrified of that, yet they live their existences in this world that we're in that is majority white in the United States. So they're not afraid of it. It's reality to them every day. So maybe finding ourselves in more of those situations where we are in the minority is the way forward. I don't know.
I have to say, I can speak from experience, living somewhere where everyone else is a different color from you is definitely a humbling experience. And really kind of brings to light things about you and yourself and your family and your culture that maybe you wouldn't expect. So I definitely think that there's never going to be anything bad about surrounding yourself with more diversity.
I do think it's worth confronting those histories, Marjorie. So you mentioned, I think it's incumbent on us to confront that history. And we always tell these stories about ourselves as we were the church during the civil rights era that invited people in. Oh, we were the ones who opened our doors and not nobody else was. But we don't hear the other stories about the pastor being run off and not doing as much. So confronting that is important. I'm not sure how that looks, but.
Well, I remember it was a few years ago, I believe the PCA churches as a whole published like a public apology for, them breaking off because of racism. So I don't know if that's something that Idlewild should do to, publicly apologize for. Maybe we did allow people of color into our services, but we're still racist, or we were still racist in our other actions. We weren't perfect back then.
Can't get my thought together. So maybe somebody
Becky,
else has a thought.
I saw your note. Becky asked the question in the chat. Can we hunt down this pastor's family and apologize, or by chance he's still living? And preached part of her sermon this past Sunday was mentioning him and his family. His widow is still alive, and he does not have a portrait in the hall upstairs at church. So I wonder if something's in the works.
We should fix that, right?
No, you can, right? You think
I
so?
think he has a portrait, but it's by where Steve's old office.
He
He
does.
does have
Is
a
it like a painting or?
Yes,
Oh, okay. All right, so never mind. He doesn't.
Well, but
It's
not named, and his service isn't indicated on it. It's this. I mean, I've wondered since I got there who that man was, and that's who it is.
We should fix that. And I was doing Frank's send-off and never went back to hear the sermon. Sorry. So that's my excuse.
It was an awesome sermon. That's when
Yeah, I heard
honestly
it was.
everybody needs to hear, I think. Yeah.
But yeah, so also to address Jeremy's point, to find places where we are a minority situation, like they exist everywhere. And I actively do try that. Like the Cosset Library downtown back before COVID used to do like free family things, and I took Simon a few times, and we were often the only white family there. And there are a lot the public library does like music gatherings there. I don't know if you know that or not. I mean, there are all sorts of things around town that if you go to literally anything sponsored by the city, you are probably going to be a minority. They are everywhere. And maybe it's because of where I work or maybe how I was raised. I don't know, but it doesn't make me uncomfortable. So I think, again, where I said initially is that like we can't assume that everyone's in the same place we are. Like you can't. Everyone's in a different place. So it's just it's hard to kind of be on a common ground. But I definitely recommend at least taking your kids to places where they're around kids that are different, that probably behave differently than they do and definitely look differently than they do. But that's important.
I think that's part of the point of all of these articles is being intentional, you know, being intentional about your activities and being intentional about your conversations with your children, being intentional about what they get to read and see on TV. So they have this awareness that keeps building as they grow, as opposed to all of a sudden reading To Kill a Mockingbird and all that's news to them, you know.
Well, and Colin, I sent you a text about a podcast that I listened to, and it's about re-examining it's called Teaching While White. And I think Idlewild may have even posted it, but it's about re-examining like the books that are on our preferred reading list. And even To Kill a Mockingbird is from like a white savior perspective. Do we ever hear about the Black people's perspective? Do we ever hear about that? I mean, it's kind of people herald it as like, oh, but Atticus Finch was so noble and he did this and he did that. And it's like, it's kind of a racist book.
Mm-hmm.
Not just talking about racism, but it itself is racist in how it tells the story. And we are so like, oh, but it's a classic, that we don't actually stand back and sort of analyze that. And there are a lot of hard things that we have to sort of examine. Oh, but that's the way we've always done it. It can't be awful if that's the way we've always done it. And it's like, but it could be better. You know, there are other books that teach the same idea, but not from like a white savior perspective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about that white savior mentality recently. What's the book with the guy who's Michael Orr, you know, the lead, and where she brings him into the family, and all of us, you know, she's praised nationally for doing that, and I don't know, that kind of rubs me the wrong way a lot of times. But yeah, Becky, to your point, we've definitely brought in at GSL some other stories to kind of counterbalance To Kill a Mockingbird, because it's written by a white lady. And so just to hear other people's perspectives is extremely important, especially with reading books and novels.
There are a couple of book suggestions. I'm a huge book nerd, and these are really for older kids, maybe high school and up at least. But The Poisonwood Bible by Barbara Kingsolver, it is by a white woman, but it does deal a lot with the white savior complex. And as a missionary kid, it was really hard to read because a lot of it was this missionary family making every single mistake that a decent missionary shouldn't make, of pushing your own ideas and not listening to the people around you. It drove me crazy. I was like, these people are doing it wrong. But that's a really good book. And then there's Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe, which is about, it takes place in like the early 1600s, but it's from the point of this family who lives and is from an African village in like Nigeria, I think, because I think the author is Nigerian. And then there's another one called What is the What by Dave Eggers, and it's Dave Eggers ghostwrote it for this man who was a Sudanese refugee, and it's about his life story. But they're all kind of hard books to read, and some of them are very graphic and violent, so I'd recommend it for older children and young adults, I would say, but all really good books. And they all have to do with Africa, so that's kind of, you know, it's a little skewed, but they're kind of off the top of my head, things that deal with racism and race issues particularly well. Sorry to take over the discussion with my book collection.
Oh my gosh, no, I think those were great recommendations. I'm so glad you have come tonight. You have participated from a very different perspective. That's been fantastic. So thank you.
Oh, thank you for
Will you be leading one of these? Do you know?
I'm gonna have to check my calendar because I'll be honest, I kind of don't remember, but I'll check it out and get back to you. Oh, one more book suggestion that I read in like elementary, middle school, Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry, I think is what it was called. I think it takes place in Memphis, actually. I don't remember the author. It's somewhere in my house, but I remember that being one that my mom absolutely loved as a teacher, and she had us read all of the school kids that she taught. She had them read it, so.
Yes, I don't quite remember that one, but I remember, I think I've read it. That's a good one. Well, does anyone have any closing thoughts or comments or ideas? We're running up on our hour. Anyone? I hope, and
I did have one other thing I'd like to share.
Yes.
If that's okay.
Okay.
Sorry. Well, one thing that I've heard and been talking about is that it's really important when talking about race with your kids that you don't always, and this is for people of color and white people, that it's not always about like how Black people or people of color suffered, and like not just the stories of history and not just the bad things that have happened to them, but also Black children as being the heroes of their story, and like Black children just kind of being regular, and like, so it's just so it doesn't become this association of like struggle and strife, but that it's also of empowerment, that could be really important too.
Well, I appreciate everybody's coming tonight. I always like to see everybody's face. And I think, I don't know, I have a really good list here of things to read, and that everybody has mentioned at least something. So I'm compile that and put it in the newsletter that will go out this week, so we can share this conversation with our larger group of friends. But why don't I close us in prayer before we go? Dear Lord, thank you for a beautiful Memphis summer night that's hot and makes inside cold. Thank you for this group that's gathered, for the open conversation, the questions asked, the recommendations made, and the ideas that have sparked. And thank you for this forum for us to gather during this time of COVID. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Marjorie, thank you so much.
Oh my gosh, thank y'all so much.
Thank
and
you.
I'll look forward to seeing all of y'all like that. Oh, before I forget, so we are, just for those of you who have not talked to about this idea, because I've reached out to a few people, we are talking about in August trying to do a family worship service in person outside that's short and family oriented, that would be very kid centered. So we're working on that, but it's going to be called Wade into Worship. And so it's in the works, just to have that to maybe look forward to, maybe, I'm not sure, maybe.
What
Everything's
ages would be
maybe.
appropriate for this service?
I mean, the ones of children's ministry, and we're still working some things like that out, but we had talked about having, you know, it on a Sunday morning, and maybe having one geared to the littles, and then maybe one geared more toward elementary, because it is different. But it would be an active worship with like an activity with you on your quilt with your children. So we're working on it, so we'll see. But it's
Yay.
nice to have something to look forward to, even if it's just something to think about. So.
Good luck, and God be with you.
All right, thanks y'all. Y'all have a good night.
Bye.
Good night.